turn it down to 1 Samuel. You read from chapter 12, start at verse 1. And Samuel said to all Israel, I have listened to everything you said to me, and have set a king over you. Now you have a king as your leader. As for me, I am old and gray, and my sons are here with you. I've been your leader from my youth until this day. Here I stand. Testify against me in the presence of the Lord and his anointed one. Whose ox have I taken? Whose donkey have I taken? Who have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed? From those whose hand have I accepted a bribe to make me shut my eyes? If I've done any of this, I'll make it right. You have not cheated or oppressed us, they replied. You've not taken anything from anyone's hand. And Samuel said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and also his anointed is witness this day that you have not found anything in my hand. He is a witness, they said. And Samuel said to the people, it is the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your forefathers out of Egypt. Now then stand here, because I'm going to confront you with the evidence before the Lord as to all the righteous acts performed by the Lord for you and your fathers. After Jacob entered Egypt, they cried out to the Lord for help, and the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your forefathers out of Egypt and settled them in this place. But they forgot the Lord their God, and he sold them to the hands of Sisera, the commander of the army of Hazor, and into the hands of the Philistines and the king of Moab, who fought against him. They cried out to the Lord, and he said, we have sinned. We have forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and the Asherahs. But now deliver us from the hands of your enemies, and we'll serve you. And the Lord sent Zerubbabel, Barak, Jephthah, and Samuel. And he delivered you from the hands of your enemies on every side, so that you lived securely. But when you saw that Nahash, king of the Amorites, was moving against you, and you said to me, no, we want a king to rule over us, even though the Lord your God was your king. Now here's the king you've chosen, the one you asked for. See, the Lord has set a king over you. If you fear the Lord and serve and obey him and do not rebel against his commands, and if you and the king who reigns over you follow the Lord your God, good. But if you do not obey the Lord, if you rebel against his commands, his hand will be against you, as it was against your fathers. Verse 24. But be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he has done for you. Yet if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will be swept away. Lord, we thank you for the day. We thank you for the opportunity to study your word. Help us to understand and help us to apply in our lives. In your son's name. In our study of Samuel, we're continuing to see how Samuel was a key player in God's plan. He was the last judge, a prophet, and a priest. He was responsible for the transition from a tribal people to a nation. We're seeing that take place now that King Saul has been made king. He was responsible for establishing the physical kingdom, which was in preparation for the eternal kingdom, and how it would be, like a shadowing of it. He was there to show how God as king should rule his people. Last couple of weeks we've been looking at Saul and how he becomes king of Israel. Initially he was anointed by Saul, and God gave him his spirit in order to change him and give him the ability to lead in the way God wanted him to. Next, he was chosen by Lot so that God would be involved, and people wouldn't think Samuel did it on his own, and presented as the king that Israel wanted. He was given the rules and the regulations of kingship. It was read to him. We looked at it from Deuteronomy chapter 17, what his responsibilities were, the things he was supposed to do and not do. And after doing this, the Bible says he went back home to raising donkeys. But then there came an incident in Jabesh Gilead on the far side of Transjordan. And he stepped up and started acting like a king and basically called Israel together. He ordered them to show up or else to deal with this particular threat. And then together they went and slaughtered the Ammonites and rescued the town and the people there, thus establishing him firmly in their eyes as the king. From From there they went and had a great celebration and confirmed him as king. Some lessons we looked at last week is that God's requirements or qualities of a king aren't always the same as what man's are. God looks at, and in his instructions said, avoid the entrapments of the world, and we need to revere and carefully follow Yahweh and his laws. A king is supposed to judge impartially, not be above the law, because it's God's people, not his people. The king that the people wanted was someone that was tall or head and shoulders above the rest, someone that demanded a presence or commanded a presence. Someone that was a warrior, someone to stand in front of them and lead them into battle and to lead them into victory and to defeat their enemies that they could give the credit to. He was somebody physical, somebody they could touch, feel, know he existed, be able to talk with, that kind of thing. And even, then we looked at the last thing, was that even though God is with us sometimes in the decisions that are our desires, things we want, sometimes God will go along with it and he will bless us at that particular time. We also looked at that even though that's the case, it's always contingent upon our actions for tomorrow. Because even though he may bless us in the decision we make today, we can do things tomorrow that changes everything. So that's kind of where we are today. Today it brings us up to that celebration we talked about at the end of chapter 11, where they confirmed him as king. We see Samuel says, okay, now you got a king. And he gives the title that's added in the Bible, and the version I use calls it his farewell speech. The author calls it a referendum on Samuel's noble life. But we find that here he starts speaking to Israel, and the whole chapter is about what he has to tell them. And the first thing he does, says, okay, I'm done. You know, he's been there for how long? Since he was young. Remember, it was him that the word of the Lord came to him. Since he was weaned. Oh, okay. Actually, since he was weaned, but he actually started leading them more since the word of the Lord came to him, and he started speaking on behalf of God for them. And he said, and he goes on and says, I've been around. Now it's time to hand the baton over to this king that y'all chose, all right, that y'all wanted. He says, as a matter of fact, he says, I listened. Did God tell him to do that? God said, listen to the people and give them what they want. So that's what he tells them. Okay, I listened to you, and I set a king over you. Here he is. It's what you asked for, you got it, you know. He says, but I want you to look at me and my life and how I ruled. And he said, basically asked them, what's he trying to get them to recognize?
He had not wronged or taken anything for what he did. He had lived his life in service to the Lord and was free from any guilt or responsibility.
Okay? He had done everything exactly like it was. And I think it was one more step, because he just got done saying, I'm stepping down. This is my life. This is how I acted before you and God. Now here's your king. What are your expectations, Mr. Anointed One? And I think it was more than just saying, I'm done and I did everything I was supposed to do, right? Everybody agree with me? I think that was true, that he was doing that. But I think it was more of an illustration as you look through the whole speech. It was a contrast between him as a judge serving God and God being king versus now here's the new way. Here's what you all want, and here's those expectations. What did he read? Had he read the rules about the king? What did those rules say? Don't take advantage of somebody. As a matter of fact, you're not above the law. Isn't that what he's going through right here? Same thing. He said, I acted in accordance with what God wants. This is what your anointed, God's anointed one, the one you chose to be your king here, is supposed to do. Okay? And so he makes them acknowledge it. Okay? Makes them testify that what he says is true. And then he's there testifying that and acknowledging that before who? Two witnesses. God and the anointed one, the king. king himself, the new king. You know what he's saying? Y'all are acknowledging this is the way it is, and that I've done exactly what you asked for, and I've handed you over to this king just like you asked for. And I'm putting this out here, and I want you to acknowledge that that's exactly what he's done before God and his anointed one here on this earth. Okay? So basically, he's handing the baton off, and he's telling them the way it is, as he does this. He goes on in verse, after he does that, and they go, yeah, we agree, we're witnesses, we acknowledge this, you got it. They're thinking, okay, celebration over, we got what we wanted and everything, and everything. And he says, okay, now let me tell you what you've done. Kind of drops the other shoe. And he starts off by talking about, in verses 6 through 11, talking about the righteous acts that were performed by the Lord. And when he starts off, where do these people begin? As a people, where did they start? In Egypt. Yeah, before that there was, a family. When they went into Egypt, as they come out of Egypt, there are people. Okay, and so as they come out of Egypt, he says, okay, God, you were in affliction, you were in pain, you were in misery from the world around you in Egypt, and God appointed 2 people and put them in charge of bringing you out of Egypt and into this land. And over he talks about into this land, because this is a land that they didn't do anything to get. It was just handed to them, including the houses, the wealth, and everything that went with it. And so he gives them this and whatever. He says, God, he sent Moses and he sent Aaron to bring you out of Egypt into this land that you didn't deserve or earn or do anything to get. You didn't do a thing. God did it through Moses and Aaron, 2 of his envoys, 2 of his leaders that he chose. But guess what your forefathers did? About the time they hit the Red Sea, actually. They started complaining, and after that, they just kind of wandered away. By the time they got to Moab over here, we find that they'd already decided to take up the ways of the world around them and start worshiping their gods. And so basically he says that they forgot the Lord, so he sold them to their enemies. And he talks about the Philistines, the Ammonites, and a few of those around or whatever that he's dealing with. So he basically said, okay, I sell it to your enemies. But as they began to oppress you, and you started complaining and crying out to the Lord in your misery, what did God do? He went to his rescue, and he starts naming off some judges, and he finishes with himself. He lists himself as one of those judges. Leaders that God sent to rescue you. They came from God. God's the one that did it. We're the ones that were the ones that were out here to lead to rescue you. So God sent us to rescue you because of this, because of your misery, and turn it back to Him. So He's painting a picture here that when you're with God, God's giving you a leader to take care of you. And when you walk away, He hands you to your enemies. When you come back to Him, He sends more leaders. It's God doing this the whole time. So He goes through and lists all that. They all kind of, okay. And He says, but. And He starts talking about the unrighteous acts that were performed by these people. Starting in verse 12, and he starts talking about the latest incident, which was what had just happened. Transjordan, last week we studied it. The Ammonites had surrounded Jabez from Gilead. I have to find a hard time with these names, but they surrounded it and was going to take it captive and all that. And so in their misery, and they're seeing what they said, they start crying out, no, we don't want God. We don't want you, Samuel. We don't want any of these things. We want a king to rule over us. Even though, who was king? God. That's one thing they still had a hard time grasping, or they refuse to acknowledge. Either way. It's probably a little bit of both. And so here they are, and here we are, and this is what they do. They send them on the Ammonites on the east, the Philistines on the west. They start saying, give us a king, because they didn't trust the God to take care of them. Instead, they wanted a physical king to rule over them. And so he goes on. I think this is a verse that we need to remember in Samuel, because this is a key verse on what all is taking place here with regard to Saul. Now, here is the king you have chosen, the one you asked for. The Lord has set as a king over you. Because sometimes, we've talked about the last several weeks, it's like, why Benjamin? Why Saul? Why this? Did God make a mistake? Is this a backup plan? Is that not what he didn't really want a king? All those things. I think it was his plan all along, and we've talked about that, and we'll see it more and more, hopefully, as we go through. But what he had in mind was not exactly what the people had in mind. And so he gave them Saul, which is a king, as he says here, he gave them a king to rule over them, even though God was their king. Now here is the king that you chose, you people chose, the one you asked for. In other words, it's not just that they ask for a king so God gives them one, as sometimes I've always thought of it. But it's more, here is a king that you were asking for in demeanor, description, everything about him is exactly the kind of king you're asking for. As a matter of fact, God had to give him, put the Spirit in him to change him in order to give him an opportunity to lead in a way that God would want him to. So we see that taking place here, and this is what they were given. And he goes, so here's your king you've chosen, the one you asked for. It's good if you and your king will fear, serve, and obey his commands. If not, what's going to happen? His hand will be against him. He just described what happened when they came out of Egypt and rejected him, and all through the period of the judges, what they did and what God had done. He's saying, okay, same thing's going to happen to you if you and your king do not stick to what you're supposed to be doing. Okay? Fearing God, serving God, obeying his commands. All right. Then we find that after that, he says, if you don't think I'm telling the truth, look at this. I'm going to show you who really is the king. What does he do? Makes it rain. Why is that so unique? It rained the other day. Matter of fact, here around Christmas, it rained and rained and rained and rained. It wasn't the rainy season. And over there, that's significant because it rains and it doesn't rain. And this is they call it the time of harvest, which basically we would think of as late summer. It's a period when there is no rain. It's dry, John's not here, but he would tell you that if it starts raining when it's time to get the hay out of the field, he's got a problem. You don't want that. It comes out in the dry season. Okay? So here it is, the dry season, it never rains and everything. He says, and I'm going to tell you who really is king, what I've been trying to tell you, what you don't understand. You think this king is going to be the one to win? He's not. I'm going to ask the Lord to cause it to rain right now. And suddenly we have, out of this clear blue sky, we have thunderstorms and basically a torrential downpour. Think they got the point? What does the Bible say?
They were in awe.
They were in awe. In awe. Yeah, apparently. And then thinking, uh-oh, maybe we made a mistake here. Which they had. Anyway, so he goes on and he tells them in the next few verses, it's okay, it's done, this is the way it is, God will be with you, and God is going to continue to bless this event the way it is. You've done this evil, yet do not turn away from the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. Do not turn away after idols, useless ones, because they can do you no good. For the sake of his name, the Lord will not reject his people, because the Lord was pleased to make you his own. God chose them. And because he chose them, he was going to look after them. And that's what they kept failing to realize. Unfortunately, the only time they realized this was when?
When they got in trouble.
When they got in trouble. Actually, it was 2 times. But yeah, when they got in trouble. The other time was when they wanted to do whatever they wanted to do. Have you thought about that? When they wanted to justify and go ahead and live a life the way they wanted to, they would always think, oh, we're God's people. It doesn't matter. God will take care of us. And we've seen that all through Israel's history. They pretty much felt like God was their God. Matter of fact, that was part of the issue when Christ came, was that they felt like they were God's people. Forget about the rest of the world and whatever. They felt because they're chosen. But he says, I've chosen you because of the sake of his name. He's going to watch out for it. All you have to do is look to him as the king. So he goes on, he finishes up his speech in verse 24. He says, be sure to fear the Lord. Serve him faithfully with all your heart. Not just go through the motions. Think about or consider what great things he's done for you. Think about that. However, if you're going to continue down this path of evil, both you and your king will be what? What happened to the northern tribes? They were swept away by the Assyrians with their king. Even the tribe of Judah, what happened to them? They were swept away by the Babylonians. They drug their king off into prison over there. And yes, we see them come back as a remnant, but do they ever come back as a nation with a king in control? Never, not until Christ returned. And so we see that he tells them exactly what's going to happen. It's very interesting because this speech that Samuel gives is very similar to another one that's already happened. Do you remember that one? Moses. Moses, when he was couldn't go into the promised land, he was about ready to die, he gives them the same speech. As a matter of fact, Moses goes so far as to say, I'm telling y'all this and I already know what you're going to do. Yeah. And so he says, it doesn't say just if you do this and if you do this. He says, if you do this, God will serve you. And when you go ahead, as John mentioned, go ahead and do what you're not supposed to do, because you're going to. I already know it. Moses knew. He spent 40 years dealing with these people. He knew exactly how they were. You know? Matter of fact, they're the ones that got him in trouble because of his having to deal with them because of the way they were. Of course, he's responsible for his own actions. We all know that. But anyway. But he still holds them accountable for that at least one or two occasions. He names them. Yeah, it kind of reminds them, you're the one that got me where I can't go. But anyway, so here we do, and so he pretty much gives them this and gives them the warning, the plus and the minus. If you do, God is with you. If you don't, you won't. It's kind of like Moses did. It's a view of things to come, and as we've studied the Bible, the Old Testament, we see a lot of that. And so we know where they're going to go, and what's going to happen, and how they're going to act. And so it's just kind of states the obvious from our standpoint, looking back like we are. All right, a few things to consider, whatever, when we start trying to figure out what's that got to do with me. Primarily today, I want to look at one thing and all the aspects of it. We've been talking about this king, Saul, contrast to God as king, or one that God would choose. When we start looking at God as king, we look at Saul as king, when we start looking at this, why did they not want, I'm not going to say they didn't want God as king. They wanted him on their side, but why did they want a king like Saul so bad?
They were jealous.
Jealous of other countries? Because why?
Because they could see him.
They could see him. What else? They wanted a warrior. Everything about it that they were wanting was something that everybody around them had. The kings around them sat on a throne. They were, leaders. They were warriors. There were all these things, and they could see these kings, and they couldn't see God, could they? As a matter of fact, if you go back to Mount Sinai, they didn't want to see God. Remember what they said about Moses? You go talk to him. We don't want to. You come back and just tell us everything. They couldn't see God. He was invisible. This is important to understand because it affects us, and it quite honestly has affected man from the beginning. That's what faith is. Faith is the substance, things unseen. Okay? It's things that you can't see. You just have to know in your heart. And you have to put your faith, your dependence, and trust on them. And here we are, we have a situation where they have, and as he's pointed out, God is king versus this other. The reality is man lives in what kind of world? Physical world. But what kind of being is man? No. Do we end when we die? No. We're a spiritual being inhabiting a physical body. The rest of the animals are physical. But the reality is we are a spiritual being. Physical dies. Physical is temporary. Spiritual is eternal. It never dies. It will always exist. We were created to be eternal. But when we go look in the mirror, do we see that? No. This world has always looked in a mirror and trusted in what it could touch, see, feel. It's a problem that this world has. That's why faith is such the debate, the thing that you got to make a decision on. Because you're sitting here and the decision is, are you trusting in the physical or are you trusting in the spiritual? Most people in this world really and truly think they're physical. It's over when they're done. Some may be religious, but they really don't act like they go on from here. Even some who claim to be Christians don't really believe it goes on beyond here, otherwise they wouldn't act as if today is the last day. Think about that. That's the whole debate. Man does not understand the things that he can't see. We can't understand it, explain it. That's what the whole creation versus evolution or scientific thing is about. Science is about things that you can explain. How do you explain a miracle? How do you explain something from nothing? How do you explain the invisible? You can't. So it's easier for man to just concentrate on what he can touch and feel and see. And so because of that, man keeps coming back to the physical. He thinks in terms of what happens today, which is temporary. As a matter of fact, that's why fun is elevated so high versus happiness. See, fun is something that makes you happy for a moment. Then it's over. Happiness is something that goes through even the good and the bad. It's something that's eternal, that lasts. And so here we are with this. We start talking about having the right heart, a heart after man or a heart after God. This is going to come up in the next chapter. We're going to see this expression, and the fact of the matter is we're going to talk about Saul in those terms. And when we do that, we start looking about man's heart versus God's heart. What is man's heart about? Me. And here and now. What makes me happy? What I can get out of today? What it takes to accomplish what I want to accomplish? And of course, all of that means whatever's in the way, we make decisions on whether to step on top of it or go around it. Some people, in order to be wanted power, in order to have that, they'll go through and kill people and do everything else. Look at the dictators of this world, whatever. It's all about me. So man is all about self. It's about the physical appearance. It's about dependence upon what I can physically do myself. Even in the United States, we're proud of the fact that we can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. What we can do is make ourselves into nothing, a nation that was nobody, and make ourselves into one of the most powerful nations in the world. Everybody in the United States, America, has an opportunity to succeed if you'll just go to work. We talk about those things, the American dream, all those, and how that is. It's all about our temporary existence that will be here for 80 plus or minus years, on what happens in our lives, and then we're gone. On the other hand, God's heart, man after God's heart, is not about himself. Instead, it's about spiritual happiness, something that endures, something that goes through bad times, because we suddenly realize we got a bunch of those. It's dependent upon God. And what kind of forces? Spiritual forces. It's dependent upon Him and His ability. It's about an eternal existence, not a temporary one. It's about an eternal one. We start looking at, okay, we've asked this in this class. Ultimately, that was the first question. Who do you trust? Where's your faith? You know, we saw that in the garden, and it's gone on from there. And that's a question we ask every day. You can either trust in man, and what does he trust in? What he can see, what he can do. That's why they wanted a king, a physical king to stand in front of them, so they could see him go ahead, and we could follow him. You know? Otherwise, we're going and we're following a prophet. You know? Into battle. You don't know. Yeah, okay, maybe. They want to see somebody that's a warrior. Someone tall, strong, powerful. Somebody that would cause the world around them to recognize that they were a threat to be reckoned with. What they fail to realize is the world around them realized that they were a threat to be reckoned with when God was on their side, because they remembered them as the people who came out of Egypt. Okay? What their God had done for them. Alright? So it's, or you can trust in God and what cannot be seen, or you can't see what is being done. Think about Jericho. Did you see anything happen there? No. Did you see God walking before him? No. But look at the power. Look at the power. When you start looking at the contrast between a physical and a spiritual king or kingdom, this is still an important problem. The physical king commands presence, warrior, got a territory, physical boundaries. This is mine, this is ours. We're in control here. Whereas the spiritual king, it's not about that. Only the results are seen. You know, we never saw him going into Jericho, but we saw the results. They moved into town. Yeah. It was theirs. It all belonged to them. We look at the physical and the spiritual, we start talking about being a provider. Okay, now we're messing with us. You know, our jobs, what we can do, how we can get an education, and how we get our education, we can climb up the corporate ladder or whatever it is to get the jobs we want in order to make more money. We make more money, guess what? We can buy more things. We can have more things. We can provide for our family. We can give a good education to our kids to grow up. Does everybody want those? Don't lie. Yeah, I do. We all want them. But we look at those and figure out that the only way to accomplish that is in order for me to do what? Scratch and claw till I get it. You know, even in their days, they planted the fields, and then what they do? They went and got a couple extra gods and put these extra gods over here. Why? Just in case.
Cover all bases.
Heads or bets is the word I got. Cover all bases. Let's make sure we got it all there. Because I couldn't control the weather. But so therefore, as if there is somebody in control of the weather, let's do something to maybe make them change their control to give in our favor. But other than that, we worked the fields. We did all the stuff work. We built the bigger barns because we had such a great harvest. We did really good, didn't we? Okay? Even today, we sit here in order to, I think of Hurricane Katrina. New Orleans is built how many feet above the ocean? Not. It's below. We put a city there with a major economic value there, and then we called and said, the Mississippi. You know what it's called? The mighty Mississippi that comes running right through it to the ocean. And says, okay, now, let's build a dike around it. Let's control the Mississippi River. Let's make it go over here. Let's do this, and let's build a dike and everything so that we can protect ourselves against those things. Don't say we don't hedge our bets. We do the exact same thing they did then. We hedge our bets, and then we go, when the force of the hurricane comes in, and it takes the ocean and dumps it in the town and turns it into a lake. Well, we built a dike around it. What do you expect? All you do is fill it up with water. And whose fault is that? Corps of Engineers. What do you mean? All they're trying to do is help a bunch of crazy people trying to build themselves in a river. Okay, they're not the only ones. I'm not picking on New Orleans because Southern Illinois, they built dikes ever since I was little growing up and everything, and I've seen fields flooded for hundreds of miles. Where the Missouri and the Mississippi come together, St. Louis. You know how many times that turns into a giant lake? About every 10 years. Okay. We try to control those things because we're bigger than God. Man tries to do that, and we do that in our own individual lives. That's what they're doing there. Why? Because it's something we can physically do. Physically do and get our hands into, and we do that. In reality, when it comes to providing for ourselves, where does it come from? The one who gives the rain, the one who takes the rain. All we have to do is what? Ask and believe. Got to do something before we do that. Plant. God expects us to plant. Matter of fact, when he talks about evangelism, he never says for us to get a harvest. He always tells us to plant. When he tells us to live, plant. Whatever it is, go do your thing. To do whatever and let God take care of everything else. Trust in Him. Pray to Him. Put your into Him because He's the one that actually provides the harvest. Too many times we think we do. All we have to do is the things God said, step out, do your part, and then let Him do His. And trust Him to do it. But that's dependent upon something that we can't control. Man is physical. He can't grasp that eternity, that part, because he looks at himself as being physical, temporary. All right, we look at our armies. Who's got the largest army in the world? Or the strongest army in the world? Military. Let's say military. United States. Undoubtedly. Folks don't like it, trying to keep up, whatever, but we do. It's always been something in this world that is important as far as whether you're going to have safety and security and whatever else. You have this great military. What do we have? Massive armies. We have submarines. We have aircraft carriers. We can take a military force to any place in the world in a few days. A force strong enough to invade a nation. We have the ability to do that, to wage war without even touching the ground. We may not be able to manage it, but we can sure obliterate it. Just ask Saddam Hussein on the road back to home when he was running as fast as he could go. We look at that and we add more and more because when it comes to the power in armies, where do we look? At us. The Chinese, they look at the number of men they have. They can just swarm you. You can keep bombing all you want, we'll take over because they're a massive army. But the reality is, when it comes to the most powerful army in the world, we don't even see it. Literally. Why? Because it's the one that Elisha saw. You remember that? The armies of God. How in the world can we defeat these people? And God said, okay, look around you. And he was like, whoa. Look at Gideon. Forget it. You don't need but a few men. We don't need the men. Why? That's not the real army. The army is somewhere else. We start looking at that. We start looking at the wars. Where's the battles and the wars being fought? Remember Ephesians 6? Put on your armor and sit back because God's going to do the battle. Matter of fact, he doesn't say go attack. He says pray. Which means put God in charge. What do you think happened all throughout the land of Canaan? God fought the battles. Every single time that they won, God fought it, and it was fought somewhere else. It was not fought with him. What is happening today, even in Christendom, as far as what's going to happen in the future? We're waiting for a king, physical, to come and reside on the throne, physical, fight a massive war, and obliterate all the forces of evil, physically, with the greatest armies and tanks and everything this world has, And then the king is going to sit on the throne and reign on this earth for how long? 1,000 years. I'm sorry. Are we physical or spiritual? Spiritual. And because of that, it shapes everything we do is because we have the wrong view. And these people here were prime guilty of doing that. And because of that, they chose a leader that was physical, that would do what they thought he should do for them to be successful, instead of realizing they were eternal, they were spiritual. God had more power and the greatest armies and the greatest king and everything in the world. And quite frankly, they didn't even have to show up. If they just go to town and say, okay, God would knock the city walls down. Too many times we have that wrong view. And I mean us in here. I know especially out there, but sometimes we forget that it's about the long haul. It's eternal. It doesn't end. It's not temporary. And we make decisions in our life based on what's going to happen today. You know, we always talk about which is better. Bird in the hand or two in the bush? Well, two is better than one. That's math. But we always choose one because it's right now. All right, I think that's the biggest lesson as far as what God's trying to say between his view of rule and king and all that versus man's. And I think it affects us in every way. Next week, we're going to take a look at man's new king. See what he does. Now that he's got it, what are you going to do about it?